Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Cup Reviews, brought to you by Cup of Hemlock Theatre. And today we are going to be talking about a play that is an American classic. It is none other than Arthur Miller's play Death of a Salesman. This is a special production that was done in the 1999. And it starred the late, great Brian Dennehy as the titular Willy Loman. And it was directed by, hold on here, scrolling my notes. It was directed by Tony winner Robert Falls. And this was a specially streamed Actors Fund benefit that was done just last week on Playbill. So I'm sure there's a digital online version you can find if you want to watch a bootleg of it. But yes, that is the production we're talking about today. I'm your host and marketing manager, Mackenzie, and I'm joined by a wonderful panel. First off, returning is our artistic director of Cup of Hemlock, the guy who lets me produce these reviews. It is Mr. Will Bartley. Hello, Will.
Hi, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Doing well rested, and enjoyed the show and lots of notes and things to talk about, so I'm excited.
Great. Wonderful. And what's in your cup today?
I am drinking white rum on ice.
Yes, but Will, what is your special cup there, Ice?
It's one of the Cup of Hemlock's cup mugs. So on the one side you have the cup logo, and on the other side you have the company logo. So beautiful. Fun merchandise there.
Yes, it is.
A little bit of a plug.
Yes, it is. Next, we have a lovely lady who has been part of our Play Book Club. She has been a wonderful academic colleague of our literary manager, Ryan Barakovich. She is Miss Aisling Murphy.
Hi.
Hello. How are you?
Not too bad. Wishing I was in like a comfy armchair at my apartment, but instead mooching Wi-Fi from the University of Ottawa. So not too bad.
There you go. University of Ottawa. Like, how was it down that way? We had snow here in Toronto today.
Yeah, we had snow last week. There's a space heater right out of frame. And I'll be honest, it was on right until we started the Zoom call, and it'll be on again as soon as we hang up.
Perfect. All right. What's in your cup?
So I have some peppermint tea in my mug. I'll be honest, again, right out of frame, I have an iced peach tea from Starbucks because not super sure what season it is and might as well enjoy cold drinks while we can. But for now, I've got some hot peppermint tea.
Wonderful. And are those cats on your mug?
Oh, they sure are. I love cats. And I just got a new roommate who brought with her a tiny black kitten, which has been just lovely.
Oh, my heart. I love cats. I miss my cat. Who lives up in Barrie with my family. That's beautiful. And then we have our wonderful literary manager, resident dramaturg, my right hand of the cup, as it were, Mr. Ryan Barakovich. Hello, Ryan.
Hi, back. Good to be back.
Yes,
what an intro.
Long time no see.
Yeah. How are you?
I'm doing okay. What's in your cup today?
I just have orange pico tea, and I didn't go for my Cup of Hemlock cup. I went for my Sad Ibsen Theater cup because, fun fact, just a year after he wrote Death of a Salesman, Arthur Miller adapted Enemy of People for the American stage. So I thought this was fitting and on theme with the show we're doing.
I love that. And I am drinking my cup of Earl Grey tea, also from my Cup of Hemlock official mug as well. And I even put on the suit with the vest in honor of Willy Loman. I had to channel my inner Brian Dennehy. Well, now that we've done all the intros, why don't we get into this play? So first off, we're going to go with, because this production was highlighting the actor Brian Dennehy, let's talk about him, because he is the titular role, and we all know, when we've talked about these roles before, where it's the lead character. Sometimes we don't want to talk about them because we're thinking somebody else will cover them in another part. But we want to make sure we give Brian Dennehy a shout out in this. So what are our thoughts on Brian Dennehy's portrayal of Willy Loman? And Will, I'm going to start with you on this one.
Yeah, sure. I can kick it off. I think the biggest thing that kind of encapsulates the entire performance for me is just a deep well of desperation at every given turn, and that well of desperation pops up water at a lot of different avenues in terms of like anger, sadness, anxiety, and fear. But I think what Brian Dennehy does so well is just using that as the baseline for the entire character, and then strumming those chords at like the key moments, and then that matched with the erratic shifts in mood that he portrays throughout the piece really captures and brings to life that character in a powerful and dynamic way where he's like a bigger guy already, like in his size, and like, you know, he fits the role quite well to begin with, but he really takes up a large space on the stage in terms of the atmosphere and energy he brings with them. It's almost like none of the characters can quite get into his gravity because there's just so much power resonating from him. And it really brings out that confidence that Willy Loman has carried with him his whole life. And then in the moments of fragility where he begins to fall apart, that's the only time that characters seem to be able to approach him. So like that atmosphere and energy Brian Dennehy carries with him is really, in my opinion, from the other portrayals I've seen from some of the other actors I've seen do this role, unmatched, which is incredible to see. So I was very satisfied and very happy with his performance overall. So yeah, that's my take.
Can I piggyback right off of that?
Yes, you can, Ryan.
So I'm glad you mentioned his physique, kind of, Will, because I think that is such a striking part of this performance. Is just he is such a physically imposing guy, and like I think to me, like the prior to this version, I would say the definitive image of Willy Loman I have in my head is Dustin Hoffman, and like look at that, he's on the cover of my copy of the play right there. Like he has kind of made himself synonymous with this role, but he's a small guy. He's kind of like schmendricky, and like he doesn't have that kind of intimidating stature. So seeing Dennehy do it where he is just like, you know, has this massive stage presence that really does like draw all eyes to him, and it does explain this sort of like confidence that he kind of has walked through his life, that how likable he is. He kind of like, you see the lineage from his son Biff to him, where just as you can kind of picture Brian Dennehy bullying, you know, a young version of Charlie, just like we sort of see Biff bullying Bernard. And I never really got that. Like it's interesting because in the Dustin Hoffman version, his name Charles Durning, who plays Charlie in that one, kind of looks more like Brian Dennehy, and Dustin Hoffman kind of looks like the Charlie we had in this production a bit. So visually, in the scenes that the two of them had together, like it is a bit of a role reversal to the version of these two characters that I'm used to. And yeah, I think it's an interesting choice that really does, quite literally add weight and gravity to the performance. And on top of that, just what a wonderful performer he is, and the depths he brought to this character. Like, I don't think we could ask for a better Willy Loman.
Mm-hmm. Ashley, what about you? You're already on it.
Sorry. Just to kind of pick up where Ryan left off as well, I was a little skeptical at the top of the show because, you know, I tried not to read too much about the production, you know, acclaim, awards, whatever beforehand. I wanted it to speak for itself. And one of the things that always kind of sets me a little bit on edge is the, you know, yelling equals angry trope. When actors rely too much on just being loud to show that they're angry, I'm always a little, there's probably more subtle ways of doing it. But by the end, I didn't care at all. Like I felt that the way he was using both his stature and his sheer volume and presence in conjunction with each other really, it didn't feel overwrought. It didn't feel too yelly or screamy. It just felt like it was coming from a very genuine place. And that's really hard to do. You know, when you, for the most part, have just yelling on stage, not good, not super effective. But I was pleasantly surprised, and he deserved all of the acclaim that he's had, I think.
Yes.
And I jump off that note for a second too, because like that's definitely something I 100% agreed with. And I think the thing that made it so powerful, and something that I always, when I'm working with actors, I bring up quite a lot when it comes to the emotion of anger, is like anger is quiet, fear is loud. And I think that's what Willy does really well, is that his yelling doesn't come from a place of like he's actually angry. His yelling comes from a place of fear. Like he's losing himself in these moments. That's most of the time that he's yelling, right? So like, I think for me, that's why those moments landed so well. It's just because it isn't anger, but he's yelling. And so like the contrast is within that performance, and that's what lands for me.
Yeah. I mean, I'll say for me, I just loved how complex his performance was. Like his performance evoked so many emotions for me as the viewer. Like on one hand, I hated him and his blustering bravado. Like I was like, you're an you're an asshole. Like, shut up. But on the other hand, my heart broke so many times for him. Like especially during that pleading scene he has with Howard, where he starts off at like, what is it, Ryan? It's like $65-$75, and then he basically gets he just keeps dropping the price every time, and you're just seeing this physical beast of a man just become almost a pitiful child by the end. And it's so I could just pulled at my heartstrings the whole time, and it was such a human performance, because we all have that part of us where it's, on one hand, we can be that annoying, blustering, bravado, egocentric person, but then on the other hand, we can be these just desperate, pleading people, like on the other spectrum. I think what was so great is that he gave such a wonderful, humane portrayal of this character. And Aisling, as you said, like, he didn't just yell the whole time, because that's such an easy trick to fall into. Like, I'm trying to remember back as Will and I saw a production of this down at Soul Pepper with Joseph Ziegler playing the titular role, and thinking back to his performance as Timon of Athens, where it was a lot of, I don't want to say yelling, but very high volume.
It was yelling. Yeah. Speaking.
Yeah, it was yelling. So I just remember that, like that. He was also just very loud, but didn't have that same depth that I think Brian brought to this performance. And I mean, like, as a salesman, the more I watched, the more I just really started to relate to him, because I mean, like, I've been that salesperson where you're trying to spin your day of sales and you're trying to talk yourself up all the time and just trying to find that little bit of glimmer of the day where it's like, yeah, actually that did go well today for me. I walked in and, hey, that secretary, she remembered me, that type of thing. And like, I've had those conversations, so I just felt it was very spot on, and I really connected with it. So yeah, wonderful, the late great Brian Dennehy.
He will be missed.
He will be, and we'll be talking about him more when we do our review of Stratford's production of Twelfth Night in a few weeks, because that just got released in honor of him as well. But he wasn't the only man on stage. We had a plethora of other amazing supporting cast members to choose from. So which other character do we feel was best performed? Ashley, I'll let you start this one.
So this production of Death of a Salesman, I think, really, it's a bit of a cop-out answer. I'm sorry in advance. But I think it's hard to make Death of a Salesman feel like an ensemble piece of theater. Obviously, it has a titular character, and it is Willy Loman's story. But I also think that this production, both in its staging and in the performances that we got from, Biff and Happy and his wife, and even the woman, his mistress, it felt like such a cohesive performance from all of them that I almost don't want to separate, Brian Dennehy and everyone else. Like, I do think that it was an ensemble performance, and, it's a 3-hour piece of theater. It's not short. And the fact that you do have such high caliber across the entire production, for me, it meant that I wasn't getting bored, checking Facebook or anything. And in streamed theater, especially, that's pretty hard to do, at least in my experience of the pandemic. But yeah, no, like I didn't think that there were any weak links. That said, I do think that the actor who played his wife, Linda, brought a lot of nuance to the role that is difficult in terms of how it's written. So that was really exciting to see. But aside from that, I was pretty happy with the performance of the production as a whole, not necessarily individual characters or voices on stage.
I mean, I'll piggyback off you, because Elizabeth Franz as Linda was my shout out for who else I think really stood out in this performance. I mean, her scene where she is breaking and finally revealing to her sons what's been going on, I cried. Like, she actually brought me to tears, just because of how good she was at playing up the facade. And then when the facade had to come down and she had to reveal the truth, just how honest she was, and how and just how vulnerable she became in that moment, where she just goes, I don't know what else to do. He's trying to kill himself. I don't know how else I can spin this, because you can tell, like, her role in the filming was always to be the spinner of all these different egos. Like she was like she's like, and she did that throughout the play, where she was such a great sounding board for all these egotistical men that then the moment where she actually had to stop stoking ego and be honest with her sons was such a heartbreaking moment, where she reveals, like, I'm mending stockings. I've had to let my hair go because he's not on salary anymore. He's only on commission. Like, all these prideful things that she's been able to hide, and now it comes down. And then on top of that, like, throughout the whole piece, she's wearing all these different masks around people the whole time. That a lot of time you don't know if she's actually being honest and believing the situation, or if she's just stroking their egos for the sake of, I'm a woman in the 1940s, and this is kind of my assigned, like, position within the family to be home, to be there to welcome my husband home and my son's home from their days outside. And, like, she just gave such a masterful, like, performance, and she was able to move from the background being reactionary to then moving into the foreground of a scene really easily, where she could easily fade in and then fade out. Like, she just wove her way beautifully through this piece. Like, she was such a great foil to Brian Dennehy's overpowering, like, just all-encompassing performance of Willy, where he just fills up the stage, and yet she's able to kind of cut herself a little crack on that stage that was hers, and she owned it. So, Will, I see you nodding and scratching your head, so I want to know what you're thinking.
I had two performers written down here, but I want to speak about Elizabeth France first, because, like, it's such a powerful performance, and honestly, it was a little too reticent of my grandmother, my dad's side of the family, and she's a very, like, proud woman. And when my grandfather was really struggling and he ended up passing away, honestly, like, the way that Elizabeth France portrayed Linda is, like, exactly how my grandmother reacted. It was like nonstop go mentality, take care of the situation, I'm stable, I'm totally fine, everything's good. And then there's these quiet moments of isolation where kind of everything drops away, and, like, the grief really hits, the reality of the situation hits. And I think that that's really I want to give credit to the director and to these two incredible actors, because at the end of the day, I think it's evident that they found the harmony between the two characters, which both of them keep on this facade until these moments where they finally break, right? And obviously, we're seeing Willy's story up close and personal, but, I think that there could easily be a staging of this version where we place Linda as the forefront character within the play and follow her narrative and extrapolate a little bit further on her text and dynamic and interactions and perspectives on these situations. Because, like you were saying, with the facade that she keeps up, I'm not sure if it's a facade as much as it is resilience of her trying to push through and make the situation better. And I'm going to be talking about this more too when we get to a later question about Willy's decision by the end of the play. But I really think that she embodies the mentality of, as a character, and what she brings as the actress, Elizabeth France, that is the mentality that things can get better if you keep pushing through and trying to find the advantage of the situation. And we see her do that by the end of the play. Like, she's talking about, like, I don't understand why you did it. Like, I just made the last payment on the house. Here we are. Like, things were getting better. And, there is a little bit of, like, there is a bit of delusion mixed in there. It's like, we only just needed one more salary, one more paycheck, but evidently from the other characters, like, that's not any way to live. You needed more than that. You would have ended up needing more. But nonetheless, she kept trying to persevere and push through. And the desperation and the fear that she shows, which is where the harmony between the two characters comes in, really springs forth during that one scene you were talking about with the two sons, where she's talking about the hose in the basement, right? The rubber hose, yes. That is. And really, I don't think that is, for me, the heart of the play. Is like, Willy, yeah, certainly is the narrative we follow, but I do think Linda is the heart of the play, and Biff is the heart of the play. And that's the other person that I wanted to talk about too. Is I believe his name is Ron Eldard, if I've got that right.
Yes.
Ron Eldard as Biff, I really want to say the character work that Eldard put in cannot be overstated. It's extremely nuanced and fine-tuned, and I'm not sure if it's work with the director or work with some people who struggle with some of the same things that Biff does, but, like, to be frank, he demonstrates so many symptoms and living habits of somebody that struggles with BPD, borderline personality disorder, or PTSD, which is so incredible. Like, he references that every time spring comes around, he just sinks, right? which is like not abnormal for people who struggle with this. There's usually a time of the year that's fixated around a more turbulent, chaotic moment, right? He talks about, pre-war, he had over 30 jobs and he couldn't hang on to any of them. Again, another symptom of those issues is that people that live with these things really struggle to hold on to consistent employment and income. And then, the feeling of being aimless, not sure who he is, what he wants, and not sure what's going to satisfy him. The feeling like less of a man, quote unquote, which in this narrative and in this time is one thing. Today it means something different, obviously. But he talks about like not feeling like a man, but feeling like a boy, somebody who's underdeveloped, right? Which is a symptom of like self-esteem and inability to reassure oneself of the confidence that he once had, and like the constant comparisons and the dialogues that he has and the shame he feels over the most minute of actions. Like I think that's why that pen monologue, when done well, really lands, right? Is like it's such a minute detail. Like at the end of the day, like Willy says too, is like, oh, you could just walk back in there and say it was an oversight. Like how many of us have done that too? Is like, oh shit, I just took this pen from the reception. Nah, whatever. I'm going back tomorrow, or it's a pen, whatever. But no, like Biff makes the biggest deal out of this because he feels great shame over any kind of failing. And he, evidently too, when we look at especially PTSD, where we're looking at a long period of toxic behavior and treatment that's been attributed to one person. And, evidently looking at the relationship between Willy and Biff, he was exposed to an extremely toxic parentage. And that's really hard for anybody that's gone through that in their lifetime. And look at the effects. I think Biff really hits it on the head when he says, like, you filled me full of hot air and I couldn't stand to look at anything that made me feel lesser than what you saw me as. It's like, it's really hard to grow up in that environment and then go forth into the world and understand the humbling effect that comes through that, right? Is like, we all need to work those Joe jobs every once in a while. We all need to push ourselves to just move to the next step, even if it means, shelving our ego. I think shelving our ego is a huge part of growing up. And then obviously the one other thing I wanted to give kudos to the director for, and again, it's the representation of Biff and his brother Hap, that they nailed the contrast between slow and fast tempos between the two brothers. Like really nailed that. And I think that that's huge when it comes to portraying these two characters and the scenes that they share together. We have Biff that's just this, like, a little bit chaotic, like his dad. He's kind of all over the place, like looking for the next dance, looking for the next thing. And there's this rushed mentality. And again, symptomatic of like not living in the present and enjoying the moment, unlike his brother, who indulges in the moment way too much and doesn't actually look for the avenues of how to make things better. He just goes, look at the moment. Isn't this a moment? And like really delves into that and drowns himself in the pleasure of those moments, right? And like we see that coming up through his problems with addiction and his flirtatious, misogynistic, really. I'm gonna go with that. Misogynistic attitudes towards women and the way that he interacts with the society around him and beefing himself up to make him seem like more in the moment, even though he recognizes in the grand scope of things he's lesser than, just like Biff. But I have to say, like you were saying, Aisling, is like the cast as a whole like really did bring it together. But special emphasis on Elizabeth Franz and Ron Elder for their portrayals of Linda and Biff, respectively. Sorry, that was a really long answer.
No, that was great. No, perfect. No, it was a great piggyback, and then it was wonderful. Don't ever apologize. Ryan, who do you got?
Okay, well...
was it also Linda?
So I was thinking about Linda, but I thought someone else will pick her. I want to give a shout out to someone who might not get picked, because that just seemed like a fair thing to do. But Will, since you brought him up anyway, I was debating between two people in particular, and Ted Koch as Happy was one of them for sure. Because I think because Biff sort of steals the show near the end, certainly in any kind of like, it is his arc that we are following, even though Willy is our central character. It is Biff who has to go through the moral journey of, oh, do I do this quintessentially 20th century American drama thing and break out of the illusions that we've built around ourselves? But Happy doesn't do that, and that makes him a more challenging character to really get a handle on. And what I loved about Ted Koch's performance is that he almost played it like a cartoon character. And I think that usually when you say that, it's just like, oh, he wasn't a real human being. He didn't have a beating heart in there. But what I think was so nuanced about the performance is that was a facade, but he's not smart enough to realize it, is I think the way that he handled this character, which chef's kiss, well done. Because the way he talks with his like overly put on voices, sly demeanor, he almost like he struck me as like Fred Flintstone a few times even, but the moment that actually probably more than anything else in this production, and it caught me off guard completely, but kind of broke my heart a bit, was the first time he said "Ma, I'm gonna get married." When right after we have this moment where, okay, Biff is gonna do well, he's gonna go in for his meeting, everything's always about Biff, and Happy's just there. I have things too. I'm also going to get my life together. And just like seeing the sadness in him and that nobody responded, like, okay, that's great, son, go to bed. Like I think it found layers of this character that I'd never really seen before. So I thought that deserved a shout out. The other one that I'll say less about, but I think it's worthy of mentioning too, is Howard Witt as Charlie. This is a very different version of Charlie than what I've seen before. And I kind of just liked his kind of blasé, stoic like approach. It made for a great contrast in all of his scenes with Willy, that, because Willy's so intense, and Charlie, even though he, is the less prideful character and less, blustering character, he commanded all the scenes when he was playing opposite Brian Dennehy. And I think that says a lot. The fact that he just was able to subtly absorb all of it, like he rarely lost his temper, and there was like a really just great dynamic between the two of them that I think, they're the two actors in this production who are both no longer with us, and he will also be missed. Let's not just get caught up in the Dennehy of it all.
Yeah, it was a very sympathetic Charlie, I found, especially in that final scene with each other where he's giving him the money and going, listen, you can come work for me if you want to.
He says it multiple times throughout, yeah.
He does, but it's that final scene where like the vibrato of Willy is down, and it's just human to human anymore. Like, it's no longer blustering. It's just, Charlie, you're really my only friend, and it's that honest. Really, it's almost like I'm sure there's a proper terminology, but it's kind of like when people are committing to complete suicide and they're kind of going through and they're doing the final goodbyes and things like that. This is where you really can start seeing Willy. This is where I started seeing Brian's Willy really starting to really solidify when he was going to end the play, his final actions of the play, because he's doing those final bits of, okay, like this is it for me and Charlie. Charlie's not coming back on stage until after I'm dead. Like, this is it and it's a beautiful end to their friendship. And you see just how much Charlie really did look past Willy's blustering attitude, and kind of that can really put people off, and yet Charlie saw the human beneath the shield that Willy keeps up a lot of the time to protect himself. So beautiful, yeah. Beautiful choices, Ryan. All right, let's head into what was our favorite production or design element of the piece. Ryan, I'll let you start this one.
Oh, me. Okay. I don't feel like I really had a good answer to this one, and we'll talk more about why probably in a future question. But I kind of just want to say this feels like a cop-out answer, but I'll say the directing in general was kind of what I'm going to go with. And I think, testament to the fact that like we all agreed that there isn't a weak link in this cast and everything was so spot on perfect. I think, yeah, it's hard to always delineate how much of that is the actor's contribution and how much is the director's, but I think this is a very well orchestrated piece. And if I could draw the comparisons to the Dustin Hoffman one, because like anytime you see anything Death of a Salesman, that is the version that I have always running parallel in my mind to it. Like that, I hadn't realized it until watching this version now, but the characters kind of rush through the Dustin Hoffman film version, that they talk so quickly, they mumble a lot of their lines, and they're in a hurry, and like it makes sense because that's a 2 hour and 10-minute movie, and this is a 3-hour stage production, but very little is cut out of that, so they have to rush through it just to get it, and so many of the lines don't really land there. And now watching this version, every line landed. Like there is so much wit and humor and nuance in in pretty much every single line of this play. And the fact that I don't think there was a single one that was lost, like I think is a testament to the directing itself. So I will put that in as my favorite aspect of the production.
Ashling, I see you smiling and nodding along with Ryan. Was that is that what you had as well?
It's not, but my answer is similarly cop-outy. My favorite production element of this production is the fact that they chose to stream this 2 weeks before the American election. I think that is one of the strongest producing choices for stream theater that really anyone's made over the course of the pandemic. Because I've been familiar enough with the play before this production, but not since high school. And this is a play that's so about binaries, and I don't think I had really thought about that before. Like, this is a play where you are either dead or alive. You're not really anything in between, and if you are, you'll be dead by the end of the play. You're either remembered by everyone you've ever met, but completely forgotten. Again, there's not really a gray area. You're successful or you're a failure. And in this tumultuous political time in the States, I mean, it speaks to the present moment without really hitting it over the head, and I really appreciated that. The fine people at the Goodman and the producers for Broadway as well, whoever is doing this streaming now, really, I think, has a good handle on what theater can do without necessarily punching you in the face with what it can do, and I really appreciated that in this production.
Amazing. Will?
Yeah, just hitting on okay, so my answer to begin is the sound design, and I'm going to get into that in a second, because I think that's something, especially play from this period, to see such strong sound design is really interesting to me. But speaking to the sound atmosphere that was in there as well, I don't know about you folks, but it was so awesome to hear people laughing and reacting to theater that felt live. Like, and I think that's what kept me in the space so strongly, is because I've been watching a lot of streamed theater lately, but you don't get to hear the reactions of your fellow audience. And I know that that's an atmosphere and a dynamic a lot of us are missing right now. So I just loved hearing a show where I was laughing at the same time as other people. And like, there were moments that I missed, or I was laughing and nobody else laughed. And it did feel like a moment where I was like, why isn't anybody else laughing? Like, looking around. But speaking more to the sound design, the actual sound design of the production itself, because nothing else really stood out to me. And I'm gonna talk about that in a few minutes. But really, like the fact that they were able to create like this hurricane of voices and sound effects that just like aided into the establishment of the chaotic mind of Willy. Like, I really don't see sound design as effective in, assisting in the storytelling as well as like in this moment. And I wish there were more sound design out there that assisted in the storytelling in the effective way that it did in this one. Like, every time there was any sound that was coming through any speaker, it was directly to aid in the development of Willy's character, the progress of the plot, and to add to the dramatic tension of the piece. And like, like, you get a lot of ambient sounds when you look at sound design nowadays. You get a lot of sound effects, you get a lot of music that goes on, but sometimes these things aren't necessary for the plot to move forward. And I really have to say, if you took all the sound effects out of the show would be much lesser for it. And not just in an aesthetic way, but truly in a storytelling way. Because we only rely on Willy then to delve into the past with him. As where this transcended, it was almost like a Wizard of Oz moment, like where we're like spinning around in the hurricane and suddenly we're in a different place, right? So like, I really have to give kudos to the sound design for the piece, and for the life of me, I can't seem to find who designed it. Yeah.
See, I agree with you, Will, that the sound is very well done and does create the atmosphere. Part of why I was reluctant to pick it, though, is because I think the reason why we're having such a hard time finding who did it is because Arthur Miller designed the sound for this show. When you read the play, he puts an awful lot of sound cues in his stage directions. The big one, that actually does create this demarcation between past and present that you're talking about is the sound of the flute, when he talks about how his father played, made, and sold flutes as this like big thing. And then there is this recurring flute cue that comes on there. And in every version I've seen of the show, they do that. So I didn't, feel like that was a big production choice. It was kind of just textual fidelity to me.
And see, like, that for me is the same thing. Like, there was a lot of controversy a while back about like what sound technicians and sound designers for musicals end up doing when it comes to like effects like reverb and echo chambers and effects like that. And I guess when I'm talking about it, because like, yes, absolutely, those effects are written right into the script, but the way that they were handled in this play in particular created a quality that's separated from the rest. Like, when I talk about like the space of the abstract when it comes to tonality of voice, right, is like they really captured that well by creating this almost echo chamber effect from all the ghosts of the past, right? And like, So it delineated itself very far away from the mortal characters that are still alive and on stage. And it helped to create just a completely different world where these characters exist. And that's what I'm talking about when I say like it's just this hurricane of voices that transcend us into like a different space and time completely. So like when I'm talking about the sound design, I'm not necessarily talking about like the sound cues that are directly written into the play, but the execution of those sound cues, like the additional effects that were layered in order to make it something more unique than what you might have seen. Because like when we saw it back at Soul Pepper, basically there was no difference between Willy talking and his brother talking. You know what I mean? Like it was just the two characters interacting, even when it was like he is like reaching out from like beyond the dead, however you want to see that, right? There was no difference between the two voices. It was just two actors speaking to each other on stage. And there were a lot of moments in this play where it was the opposite, where it's like it starts with like this echo and this fade and this drawing in, like, and it pulls you back into your seat as you're feeling more drawn into the play, right? And then as you're drawn in, suddenly those echoes begin to fade and we're back into a different time period. We're back to 20 years ago, 30 years ago, whatever the time period might be. And I have to say that really is a credit that should be given to the sound designer. Because like, yes, they are taking whatever was in the script, but then they are also making it their own and adding in elements which help to delineate and clarify the storytelling taking place. If that makes sense.
Yep.
Whoever you are, you did a great job. You should be very proud.
20 years ago.
That as well, because I had noticed that as well. Because yeah, obviously, you know, Arthur Miller says we hear a flute, but he doesn't say exactly what we hear. And my first note from when I was watching the production was just this intro music sounds like something out of Pixar. And to speak to what you said, Will, about, you know, it feels like we're taken to another world. Yeah, that kind of tracks. Like it does feel like we're in something that's a little removed from how things actually are. And, you know, the Alley who was watching this in the first 5 minutes agreed based on the sound. So it was just, it made it an experience, which I appreciated.
I would say for me, I think my favorite production design element is kind of a mix between the direction and the lighting team, because it's the transitions that I found were really strong with this, where because this play is jumping between time periods and in and out of Willy's subconscious, you could get really muddled with it if a director doesn't know how to do those transitions properly and doesn't know how to direct the production team to make sure that vision that they're looking for is executed and the audience can follow. Like I found it was such a great way that the director Robert Falls was able to kind of seamlessly weave between these key moments of time and subconscious, where really it was just a wonderfully seamless show where there was really no stop to it. Like even like in the scenes in the bedrooms, because it's on that turntable and the scene just moves its way into the next scene, it just rolls along. It's almost like driving in the car that's gonna crash at the end, and you're just kind of rolling until you get to the very end with the lights and Willy crashing the car. That's when you really get that full like stop of the piece, and it kind of all comes to a screeching halt. But up until then, the whole story, even though it's bouncing through time periods and in and out of subconscious to consciousness, it's always moving. There's this continual movement and flow to the piece that I thought was really well done, that really kind of allowed this play to kind of have a great clarity. Because I remember seeing it the first time with Soul Pepper, and it took me a minute to figure everything out with the whole, we're jumping, we're not jumping, this is actually Willy's subconscious we're going into, we're not actually in the past, this isn't like a real moment from the past, this is more Willy just having a moment to himself. Like I remember being a little bit confused about that the first time, and then seeing this, it was just so clear the way they did it. It was fantastic. So,
and I just want to spring off that too, because I think bringing up the Soul Pepper production from, what was that, like 7 years ago now?
Like 2012,
that was
2013,
in the
8 years
fall
ago?
of 20.
Yeah, it would have been 2012.
2012, yeah, fall 2012.
Jeez, yeah. So
We're
8
old,
years ago.
Will, we're old.
Yeah, 8 years ago. Like I fully agree with you, because that production there, like they didn't change the lighting, they didn't change the sound, they didn't change the set. Like when Willy's brother came onto stage, Ben came onto stage, it was just kind of like, okay. I mean, if you know the play, you know what's going on. But like for anybody that's seeing this for the first time, it's like, yo, who's this guy? Like, what's going on? Like, is this like actually happening? Which is like fine to have as an element, but really, if we're transitioning into kind of this purgatorial state of life, death, what is this? There should be some sort of defining shift, and this production certainly does that well. So,
Love that. Okay, all right. Next is the weakest part of the production, and this is when I want to start, just to kind of get the ball rolling on this one. And so my thing that I think was the weakest, and I don't know who it falls to, but at times it was the pacing of the piece. Even though the piece had great transition and flow, like I said just a moment ago, the pacing sometimes felt really slow. Because the scene that really worked for me was the scene between Howard and Willy. Because while Willy's pace was slow and he's trying to figure things out, the world around him with Howard and the outer world is spinning much faster. So the scene, even though it probably took about the same amount of time as in the other scene, it felt like a bit of a... The moments were clicking a lot faster. Yet Willy was still having his slower reactions to things. And yet there were other scenes where it was Willy and either Linda or Willy in the house or Willy alone on stage, where it just kind of, I was like, can we pick this up just a little bit? Like it sometimes just felt like a hair too slow. Like I would have loved seeing things like Willy isn't like, yes, Willy's having some mental health things going on, but like that doesn't mean his reactions are like sluggish. Like he's still he's a salesman. He's a fast talking, like that's his gift.
But he's off his game. Remember,
he is off his game. But even when you're off your game, you still don't have to slug the thing. You can still keep up some bit of. We still should see at times that old Willy really fast spitting thing beyond just in his past moments.
I think I disagree.
I also disagree, but I'll let you go first.
I was about to say is like I really do think that we see some moments with Willy and Brian Dennehy's portrayal of the character where we do see the salesman mentality. And I think it's when he's kind of lying about how bad things are to everybody.
Yeah.
It's very much like wheeling and dealing mentality. It's like, no, everything's good. Don't worry about it. I'm just going to keep moving forward. Just keep moving forward because that's what you got to do, right? It's like you get this pushing forward mentality. But I think the big thing too when we look at the tempo of this piece. I think it needs to be a bit of a slower piece when we look at the character. And I think you hit it on the head, Mac, when you said that Howard is very fast and the other characters of the family are very slow. I don't think that that's an accidental choice. I think that's very deliberate because these characters that are part of the family, most of them are living in their own little world. And the world outside of them is constantly moving faster and faster and faster, and they are being left more and more behind. If you're going to highlight that fact about the play and highlight how much of a struggle people are having with this, like the people in this family are having with really understanding the life that they're surrounded by versus the life they thought they'd be living, you need them to be a bit slower than the world that's spinning fast outside of their window, which is why these interactions with the characters tend to go by very quickly. Like when Willy gets fully fired from his job, right? And he runs into, forgetting the character's name,
Bernard.
Forgive me. Sorry? Bernard, yeah. When he runs into Bernard's like, hey, like, what's going on? And it's like very fast, dynamic, and pace, but it still holds weight. It holds emotional depth to it. And, when he's offered the job and he's playing cards with his friend, those scenes like go by so quickly. And I don't think it's a coincidence either that when Willy is slipping into the past, those are the scenes that quote unquote drag the most. I think that temporally, the way that this piece is directed is anything in the past and moving toward the present of the family characters is slowest to slow. And anything going on outside of the family is fast, right? Like we see Bernard 2-3 times during the play. We see him rush onto the stage. Hey, you got to do your math thing. Why didn't you meet up with me to study? Blah, 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 blah. He's gone, right? The next time we see him, he didn't do it. He failed the math thing. I tried to help him. I'm not trying to help him. I don't know what to do. Help him. Like, do the thing, right? He's like, okay, I'll try my best. And then he leaves. And the next time we see him, he's like, hey, what's going on? Like, oh, you're okay? Okay, well, let's just take a seat. Like, blah, 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 blah. What can I do to help? Right? And then he's gone again. And then, like, even the transition of the age of that character jumps as where Biff and Happy and these other characters don't seem to age between their transitions very much. But Bernard does. Howard does. Like all these other characters do. In fact, all the narratives surrounding these characters are about how much they've grown, how quickly they've grown, how big they've grown, how successful they've become, right? And like, how do you not look at that and say like those characters are captured in the faster tempos of the piece and the rest of the world that we see, which is focused in on the family of the Lomans, is slow because they're stuck in visions of who they once were, visions of the past of themselves, right? And I really think that that's a powerful choice. And there are times in theater where it should drag. And you need to challenge your audience to say, stick with it because it pays off. And I really do think that it paid off in this production.
Aisling, I see you smirking there. So what are your thoughts?
Okay. I'll preface this by saying that I kind of operate under the philosophy that there are very few pieces of theater that warrant being over 90 minutes long. I might actually argue that this isn't quite an exception to that. Like I did enjoy it, but I also did think I agreed with you. Parts of it did drag. And the person that we're not really talking about in our discussion of pacing is Arthur Miller. And I think that his writing is kind of where a lot of this is coming from, because the main place where I was not frustrated, but definitely noticing more of a laggy pacing, it was in the first scene between Biff and Hap on the bed. Because I was watching it and I felt it dragging, and I felt it going by so slowly. And I'm like, okay, these actors there's such a craft in the acting. Like, it's not the acting. They're both doing a really great job with this text. Cool. They're moving in ways that make sense. There's trajectories that are happening in terms of like the visual presence of the scene. Like, someone has directed them and someone has directed them well. That's not what's making it drag. What is it? It's like, the dude wrote really long scenes, and I think that's okay. It's an older style of playwriting that these days feels a little tropey, but we also have to keep in mind that he's the one who made a lot of the tropes. So like, I think a lot of the issues with pacing have been navigated as well as they can have been by a, decently contemporary cast and production crew. But also, Arthur Miller had a lot to say, and he took a while to say it, and it's a take that I'll stick with.
Ryan, as a playwright, what are your thoughts?
This is still on the pace discussion. Okay,
I guess cool. So. I mean, we're all jumping in on this.
So like, I do side with Will on this discussion, because I commented before that, like, I think again, we'll bring up the Dustin Hoffman movie again, but I brought it up in the same context before. Like, I think they rush through the piece to get there. And like, I agree, this comes down to just like Arthur Miller wrote a lot, and if you want it to be in like a short container, you have to rush through it. But what I appreciated was that they didn't rush through it here, and I do feel like every line landed. And something that's interesting, I was just rereading earlier today that there's a chapter in Jordan Tannehill's Theater of the Unimpressed that talks about a recent radical revival of this play. That we don't need to get into the details. It's by a company called 600 Highwaymen. But when Tannehill was interviewing one of the co-creators of the company who devised the piece, she talked about how, we were planning on, stripping things out, going crazy, condensing it down, kind of like really mixing it up. But then while they were working on it, they realized that everything is important and everything is a setup for something else that comes later. And I think, there's a reason why these became tropes. What Arthur Miller was putting into this is because he was really good at kind of making every piece of information count. It's something that he learned from Ibsen. And I think, I can't fault him for it, because it's just such a good job. And I think the staging of this production recognized that, and very clearly, they gave their audience credit that, they will stick with it and follow along and pay close attention. Ashley, you said it yourself earlier that you didn't feel like checking Facebook while you're watching it. You were engrossed in it, and it was 3 hours long. So I think that says a lot.
Yeah, I mean, like, there were definitely times where I was like, if this was a show being written in 2020, I would write something probably quite snarky, being like, go and make some cuts. But Ryan, you're absolutely right. Like, there's nothing that you can really cut from this, and it's this perfect little orb of show as it is, and then it references itself constantly, and it set up the tropes and the what are now cliches in theater, and it did it really well. And that's why those things have become cliches. Even again, borrowing from Ibsen, his use of symbolism, like when you have the heating hose that says so many things about it's the thing that he's trying to kill himself with is the thing that he can't afford to pay for, and stuff like that. Arthur Miller is good at his job, end of podcast. But like, I do think that things like pacing are also valid to comment on. And it's how do we navigate staging what are now classics in the present era without them feeling dated and 3 hours?
My first question to anybody, like when it comes to questions of pacing, especially about like more pieces from this era and pre, is like, what would you speed up? What would you rush through? Because like that's a really important question when we're talking about like, did the pacing land? Did the tempo of the piece land? is like I think we as artists, especially if we're looking at staging pieces like this or criticizing pieces like this, we need to ask like, what could have been faster without dismissing elements of the piece. And like, I kind of echoing what you just said, Aisling, and echoing what Ryan said, is like, I really can't think of a scene that you could rush through that wasn't already a faster tempo. Like the neighbors playing cards together. Like, yeah, that was a very fast paced scene and it worked. You know what I mean? Him talking to his brother about the opportunities to go up to Alaska. It was a slower paced scene. Could we rush through that without really understanding the tragedy of Willy Loman and then the life that he struggles to live with? Like, I just don't think so. I think if we rushed over that, and we actually kind of saw that in the Soul Pepper production, as that the scenes with Ben went by so fast. When I look back on that, I can only remember one time Ben was on stage, and so for me, the dynamic with his brother just didn't land. And in this one, that's just not the case. Like, the dynamic he had with his brother felt as important as the dynamic between Biff and Happy, and I think that that's how this play is supposed to land. But if you rush through those scenes, you don't get it, and there's no payoff to that. And Arthur Miller is, in my opinion, a king of payoffs when it comes to writing. So yeah, that's where I stand on it.
Beautiful. I mean, do any of us have anything else we think was the weakest part of the production? Because we kind of have picked mine.
Like, we all just jumped onto yours. Like, I can say mine quickly, because it's not something we need to dwell on unless you all vehemently disagree with it. I didn't like the staging of the car crash. And it was actually a big part of the reason why I wasn't inclined to pick the sound for my favorite part of the production, even though otherwise it was very well done. It just had like this, I feel like I'm using the word cartoonish a lot, but it had this cartoonish like spring noise that happened like when the car crashed up, like boing, and like it took me right out of it in what should have been the most emotionally wrenching moment in the entire show. Like, the visual staging of it is fine. I get that we don't need to see an actual like car crashing on stage. Like, the use of the lighting and the headlights did the job just fine. And of course, like, Linda and Biff's reactions do help sell it and bring it back. But yeah, the sound in that moment did take me out of it, and it felt like a wrong place for that. Something that felt that silly to me. I'm sure they didn't think it was silly when they were staging it, but that's how I read it.
Fair enough. Yeah, I mean, it's always an interesting choice of how do you stage that car crash. I'm trying to remember the way they did it in Soul Pepper. I think it was almost as if Joseph Ziegler walked off stage and you just hear the sound. And then because I think I remember they opened the trap door in the center to be the grave for the next scenes. I think it almost went to black and you just heard the noise. If I remember correctly, I think that's how they did it. But I can't remember.
I honestly can't remember, to be perfect. Like, the moment from that part of the play that sticks out in my mind from that production is when he's playing with Seeds in the Garden. So the aftermath doesn't. You know, I look at that because I found it a bit funny too, Ryan, to be frank, and I just staunchly defended the sound design of this production earlier. But you know, when I look at the design elements of a production, there's always a moment where it kind of dips off. It's like, okay, what I usually look at when the question is like, what's the weakest part of the production, is something that consistently through the whole piece, I'm just like, really? And for me, that's the lighting design. Like, I've seen this dark, oppressive look on stage in several other productions, and sometimes it works, like in the Macbeth review that we did a while back with Stratford, and other times it just doesn't. Like, every scene in this play felt ill-lighted, dim, congested, and you can argue that is a stylistic choice to like capture the soul of the characters who feel trapped or whatever you want to say, but there are times where it's just like drab to look at. I was going to say bleak, but that's an aesthetic, and you can argue that that's a good thing. But no, it seemed drab to me. It seemed a little bit uncreative. I just felt a little empty and clustered. I'm not really sure how to even phrase it, because it was something that I just found to be relatively unimpressive. And I know that's a harsh review of a design, but for me, just the lighting did nothing to really establish itself as a creative focus of the play. But it also didn't do enough to be harmonious with the rest of the design elements and the characters in the stage. And I think that's when that's the dynamic, when it doesn't stand out but doesn't contribute and fall in line with everything else, there's something off there. And for me, that every scene, I just looked at the lighting and I was like, it's the only thing that's bugging me, and that really says something.
It looks like a lot of scenes were set at night versus like some daytime, some indoor, like that restaurant scene with the suns. It was like do we not have any other like atmospheric lighter lights we could use? Like, I know this is a back room, but like, is it more than just table candles? So I have to agree with you. Thinking back on some of that lighting choice, it was a very dark tone they set with the lighting. That, yeah, at times it was like, why? But this is an older production. I don't know if we could even ask the lighting designer why, if we ever ran into them. Aisling, how about you? What do you think?
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned the lighting because I'm realizing, oh yeah, I didn't really think about it, but also I should have been. There's so many options that you can take if you're doing lighting for Death of a Salesman. I mean, to me, capitalism looks like fluorescence, and you can do really cool things with mimicking that on stage. And I almost find that sort of harsh fluorescence, Exhibit A, is more oppressive and interesting to look at than that kind of dark and moody thing that we've seen in every show since 1995. So yeah, I'm inclined to agree with you that while I didn't notice it at the time, it will now bug me as long as I think about the production. So
it's one of those things too, where it's like when we talk about the slipping into the past and the visitation of the ghosts from Willy's past too, is like, if you just changed it from like a white light, like you're talking like the fluorescent capitalistic oppressive drench of light that we have on us all the time, to like a softer warm light, like a summer radiance almost, just like
funerary candle even, like
that could have been so cool, just that, like, because with the sound transition and the character switch and the atmosphere of the whole stage changing when these characters emerge from the darkness, if there was a lighting shift in there, I'd have a completely different review of this piece. But it just felt like it was doing its own thing. It's like the guitar player going on a solo for 20 minutes while the drummer's sitting there like, okay.
Love that. Okay. All right. Let's head into the last question of this section, which is, do we think this production hit its mark, and is it worth the watch? Ryan, as our resident TA, where do you fall in this production? Would this be one that you would show over the Dustin Hoffman version in your class?
Well, okay. Well, since one of my former students is in the Zoom room, I will ask her. Aisling, do you think if we were studying Death of the Salesman in our, theater history 2 at U of O, would you have liked to see this version, or can you think of another one?
I think this one holds up. I wouldn't have wondered why this was the one we were watching if you had been to show this in that theater history 2 course. I think I could have, 19-year-old Allie could have bullshit an essay on this paper, and you could have written something nice and snarky in the margins about it. I think
it sounds like our vibe, yeah.
Yeah. It would have, tracked on all levels. There have been other productions of Death of a Salesman, in the past couple of years that I think are interesting and I hope have been filmed for posterity. The main one being at, I want to say the Royal Court last year. I might be wrong. But there was a British production of it last year that featured a Black actor as Willy Loman. And I think obviously in the present moment, that just adds another layer to the piece that Arthur Miller didn't intend. And I almost think that layers that come regardless of intent are even better. But that aside, yeah, you could have shown this. That would have been great.
So, yeah, I will answer Max since you asked just from a programming teaching perspective, but since it's so rare that I have one of my former students in the rooms, I thought I'd flip it to you. I think to me, this one will stick with me as the definitive classic production of this. Doesn't mean I'm not open to creative reinterpretations of it. I would love to see more of those. But yeah, step aside Hoffman, this one is the one I'm going to play in my head when I'm reading the script, I think, moving forward. So well done to the whole team.
Well said. Will, what are your thoughts?
I think when Ryan says that this is the go-to classic production, that's the sentiment I agree with, because this to me feels like the closest staging to what Arthur Miller might have intended with this piece. Mm-hmm. And that's my personal opinion on this. Is that the best for today? I don't think so. I think there's a lot of creative ways that this piece could be staged nowadays that haven't been explored. It's one of those pieces that I think falls to the wayside. It's like, yeah, Death of a Salesman. And it's like, it's still a really good story, especially in today's political climate, as was talked about earlier, like the choice to have this being streamed right now. I think there's a lot of ways that this could be adapted for modern telling. But But in terms of what Arthur Miller may have intended with the story that he had written, I think this might be the closest representation we have. So when it comes to, if we're talking about like an educative stance about like Arthur Miller's writings and like the spirit that he brings in, the themes, the motifs, the ideas, yeah, I'd probably say that this one is worth watching. Brian Dennehy knocks it out of the park, and like the ensemble as a whole is just very cohesive, and the only moments of dissonance between the characters in terms of tone, tempos, rhythm is when it's called for in moments of conflict. And I really think that is an understated aspect of theater production nowadays. Is like the cast is harmonious until they're not, and like the moments that they're not are so intentional, and it's to amp up the drama and the tension of the piece. Like really, this production as a whole is an excellent take on this story, and really deserves some attention.
Wonderful. Ashley, I know you kind of gave a mini answer with Ryan's punt to you, but overall, do you think it's worth the watch if you had your choice and wasn't assigned you by a teacher?
It's funny because this time it kind of was, but no, I do think it's worth the watch. To jump into the semantics, I think most theater is quote unquote worth the watch, but that's a conversation for another day. I will say that since I watched this production, I did actually go back. There's a Simpsons episode that plays with Death as a Salesman, also worth the watch. I believe it's from 2-ish years ago, and it is decently faithful to the text. Highly recommend. But yeah, we could keep on coming back to this being a definitive production of Death of a Salesman, and yeah, I think so. I think it's pulling from some of the best of American theater. I enjoy that it's pulling from Chicago theater because I do think that Chicago theater is kind of a microcosm in its own, and I'm really glad that it got the opportunity to shine on a more national stage in both its transfer to Broadway and in the streaming, which is super cool. And this production made me think of how we can reimagine Death of a Salesman today, both with more current cast of actors and just with more of the technologies and motifs that we have available to us today. I mean, I found myself thinking of, what if we did Death of a Salesman with Bob Odenkirk as Willy Loman and things like that? And it's like, there's still such utility in these texts that are getting older and older, and that's really exciting. And when productions like this one preserve the best parts of the text as well as it did, that's really cool.
I will say for me, piggybacking off Will a bit, this is very... I would say because Brian, so if you didn't know this, the original Willy Loman was the wonderful actor Lee J. Cobb, who, if you've seen 12 Angry Men, he plays the last juror to kind of bend and review and kind of, once again, he plays a very hurt father in that film of 12 Angry Men as well. But Brian Dennehy really was very much like a Lee J. Cobb in this. So I do agree with you, Will, that this probably is as close as we're ever going to get to seeing what Arthur Miller saw when that production was first mounted with Lee J. Cobb. So I do agree with that. I do think it is worth the watch overall. I wish they would release this more. I mean, it was only available for like 4 days. So trying to get everybody to watch it was really tough. I mean, I'm sure there are bootlegs out there that I don't know where you'd find them, but I'm sure they're out there. But I would hope that
not that we condone people using them.
We do not.
Officially speaking.
Yes, officially speaking. But, I mean, this is just such a beautiful performance by a late, great stage and film actor, Mr. Brian Dennehy. That for that alone, you want to watch this. And that, as Will said, the cohesive ensemble is fantastic to watch. The family dynamics in this are really well captured. And it's this particular production, you can relate to so many different characters at different stages of life. Where that's what's really nice about this. It transcends just, it's the old white man story. This is very much like anybody who's ever done a sales job or has struggled in life to not live up and to have your daydreams of grandeur fade away. Whenever you have that realization in life where, I'm not going to go ahead and win that Tony. That time has passed me by, or whatever your big goal of life was. Like we all have those moments of realization. So I think that's what makes this a really beautiful production, is it's a beautiful human, multi-generational performance. So I would definitely say watch it.
I'd love to pick up on something you said as well, because you're absolutely right. It doesn't feel like the old white man play, which I really appreciate. That being said, you see that starting to emerge in Biff. in certain scenes, like you watch that and you're like, oh, you're going to become the boomers who are making things suck now. And that it's written into it so well, even while both of the sons are in their youth. And I was watching, it was like, wow, Willy Loman isn't the one that's going to, cause all these troubles later. It's going to be his kids who he's, given all this hot air. He's set them up to be amazing, and then they're not. And then they're just bitter for the rest of their lives. It's doing it in 2020. Great choice. Yeah.
Love that. Okay. Let's head into now some more play-based questions. So our first one is, do we feel that Miller succeeded in his goal to write a 20th century American tragedy comparable to the model of the ancient Greeks? Ryan, I'll let you start this one because you are our resident TA, theater historian. You have a lot of history to pull from on this. So what sayeth you?
Well, I guess I'll start by saying nobody's getting a prize for mentioning that, very shortly after the debut of this production, Arthur Miller published an essay called Tragedy in the Common Man, where he basically made that the stated goal of this play, to write a contemporary American tragedy, and specifically one that challenged the Aristotelian idea that a tragic hero had to be someone highborn from an upper standing, and it would not be tragic if a poor person or a slave in Aristotle's time was the tragic hero because they have nowhere to fall from. And Miller put forward the idea that is very much entrenched in the ideal of the American dream in its own way, being this dangerous cocktail of democracy, capitalism, and the Protestant work ethic of, saying that in this country, in this time, in this false sense of a meritocracy, everybody is given the sense that with enough hard work and gumption, they can succeed, and everyone's constantly striving. And because this is a false promise, most people will not succeed because the system is rigged against them. And there is tragic gravitas in that struggle, regardless of where you're coming from. And I think, we've brought up race a few times in this discussion, and I think the fact that, Miller is presenting this as something that is, revealed to be a false promise for a middle-class white family. Could you imagine, any black family in America at the same time in 1949? 10 years later, we'll get Raisin in the Sun, and that kind of is showing a similar story from that perspective. But I think, it works as a tragedy because that was its stated goal, but I'm also often skeptical of especially on very controversial topics of tragedy, the idea of the playwright polemicist kind of contributing to this debate on what even is tragedy, and constantly shifting the goalposts in response to the stories they want to tell. I feel like this isn't a satisfying answer that I'm giving to this, but
I'm loving a history lesson.
I will say it's a tragedy because it's set out to be one, and we do feel for the journey of this character. It doesn't matter that he is not a rich king. And something that Miller also says in this essay is that every tragedy that he can think of, certainly if there are exceptions, they're news to him, is about the pursuit of a character trying to improve their standing in society. And even when it is a highborn character like Oedipus or Macbeth or whoever, or Hamlet, that is still the goal, and that is what drives them. And it doesn't matter that they're already high up, that they're falling. It's that fall can happen regardless. So if we are defining tragedy in these terms, which I know is controversial, it succeeds. And it is tapping into something unique to the culture that birthed it.
Will, I see you nodding. So what sayeth you on this topic?
Yeah, well, my first, when we're talking about it being comparable to the model of the ancient Greeks, my first thing is Willy Loman's not a king. He's not noble. That was the very first line I had. It's no. But then I continued to extrapolate. It's difficult because when we look back at tragedies, especially Greek tragedies, what we're looking at is the personal tragedy of the titular character usually, but then how it affects society as a whole. And that's what I get the sense of a lot of the time is when we look at tragedies throughout all of history. You brought up Hamlet as well. It's Hamlet, yes, very personal struggle. Should I kill my new stepfather? Should I not? There's literally to be or not to be. But really, at the end of the day, it's also a conflict of like, how will my country, society, kingdom deal with this in the aftermath? And usually there's one of two results. It's either the society takes the precedent or the character's personal tragedy takes the precedent. And I think the thing that really lands for me here, where it kind of breaks away from that model of the ancient Greek tragedy, is the fact that there's elements of the society at large around Willy, but I think one of the real tragedies we find here, and I think that's something that Arthur Miller captures really well, is the inability to affect your society, the inability to change things to what you want it to be, the inability to have an ideal, but never have the ability or the power to see it come to fruition, which is why I think that there could be a lot of creative stagings of this piece nowadays, where we, like, depending on the casting that takes place or the political take of the piece, there's some really powerful statements that can be made about the disparity between different aspects of society and different contrasting demographics within society as well. So getting back to the question, though, do you feel Miller succeeded in his goal to write 20th century American tragedy? First part, yes, 100%. It's a tackling of the death of the American dream, which there are still people under such an illusion that this is still a reality. Like, if you work hard enough, you will make it big. There was this incredible Trevor Noah show. They had a reporter go out to a Trump rally recently, and he's interviewing a bunch of people. And he asked one of the older gentlemen that's there, is like, how do you feel that the economy has been under the last administration for the entire United States? He goes, oh, it's been absolutely fantastic. I love it. I'm making 4 times as much as I used to make. It's a true fulfillment of everything that's been promised to us as American citizens, right? And the interviewer asked him, so what do you do? And he goes, oh, I work in debt relief.
I saw that.
Which for me is really capturing of sometimes the personal ignorance that can be at play. Is like, if you work in debt relief and your job is, you're gauging the economy's success based on your job going really well and making more of a profit, like, you are very short-sighted in what the impact of that truly is for your economy to begin with. And I'm
Just
sorry,
selfish.
I didn't need to get like,
No, but yeah.
modern in the politic, but like, really, like, when we look at tragedies, like an American tragedy, I think that's pretty tragic as far as it goes, is the true ignorance and then the inability to change ignorance. And I really think that's the fine line these characters walk in this play. As where in Greek tragedies, it's a little bit more difficult because these characters do have a lot of autonomy and choice over what they're able to do versus what society tells them they're able to do. Beyond that, too, their choice often defines what society will be moving forward from that. So I think that's where the big contrast between the two pieces comes into play. And I think the best example of that is like Antigone, where it's basically a dialogue between two characters about like mortal law versus like religious law, and like that dialogue coming to fruition, both them standing like digging their heels in and refusing each other outright, and the fallout of that, while feeling personal for Creon, certainly has implications that far outreach him in terms of the society around him, and he feels that pressure very strongly throughout the play, and that's a big focus of the play, is the societal pressure he feels throughout the piece. As where in here, it's a lot of personal pressures that are brought on by society, and I know that doesn't seem like a huge difference, but for me, if I'm looking at the two, that's the best way I can communicate the difference for me, that any of that makes sense.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Ashley, what do you think?
I'm going to push back a little bit against something you said, Will, because it's interesting. You said that the characters have a lot of free will, and I think they absolutely don't. I think that Willy Loman is pretty, damned from the beginning, not least of which so the show is death of a salesman. He's going to die. He's in a capitalist society, which obviously doesn't go well for anyone. But also, so tragedy, classically has been about the high man, the aristocracy falling or struggling to attain their goals, whatever. He is a low man. He is Willy Loman. He's always going to be damned for that to be what he is, and he can't grow beyond that no matter how hard he tries. So I don't think his free will, if he has it, even matters. I think that his fate is always going to be what's governing the action of the play and the action of beyond the play as well. And no one gets points for the Loman thing, but I think it's fascinating, and also good job, Arthur Miller. It's simultaneously both so subtle but also heavy-handed. Great. Good stuff.
Yeah. Go ahead, Will.
Sorry. I was just about to say. Yeah, I was just about to say is like, I'm going to talk about this a little bit further down in a later question, but like I know I can full-heartedly agree with your depiction of these characters lacking in choice, and I think that the final scene is representative of that personally. is the choice that these characters have made. And that's what a lot of the latter half of the play is about, is like, what will their choices be to move forward, or not move forward in Willy's case. When we talk about free will within society, I think that it's a very large picture about like what it means to have choice and what choices are either reasonable, viable, or acceptable by society standards, and then feeling the pressures of that society bearing down is what restricts our understanding of free will. Anyway, that's an interesting conversation, black hole to go into, and let's maybe not.
Yeah, I mean, the question there is kind of like, do you have choice at all under a neoliberal capitalist society? Which I don't think Arthur Miller thought so, and I think however many years later, we don't either.
So does the low man have free will?
You get points.
There's a whole master's like essay, like a thesis you could do on this whole topic.
I'm sure someone's done it already. But yeah, I also just, Aisling, since you brought up the title, something that I think is interesting, because yeah, like it is, big spoiler, the salesman is going to die and it will end tragically, but the title is stated aloud in the middle of the play when he's reflecting on, what was his name, Dave Singleton, the salesman he knew that kind of inspired him to get in the biz. And he talks about the death of a salesman as this great triumph, that he lived a salesman's life. He died as a salesman and all of his clients were at his funeral. That is, it's a very small dream, but that's all Willy wants out of life. Mm-hmm. And, his march towards death wouldn't have been so tragic if, his clients cared enough about him to show up. But then, of course, we have the Requiem and it's just his family and neighbors there. And I think that is like, if not where the tragedy lies, it is, the fact that his dreams are so small and still cannot achieve them, I think says a lot about the life of Willy Loman.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say for me, like, I think Miller really did create a beautiful 20th century. I would even say American tragedy. I would say universal tragedy, because the whole concept of if you work hard enough has been imbued across the entire world. I mean, everybody, anywhere in the world gets told, hey, if you can, like, apply yourself, work hard enough, go to school, get the good grades, go out and work hard at your job, get promoted, you will eventually
not in communist countries.
Well,
like, this is a distinctly capitalist ethic that we are working with here.
Fine. So democratic. Okay, fine. So universal democratic country tragedy, where we're all where is that thing of, yeah. I mean, it's a story. It's a great modern version, because, as you said, all the old tragedies are the royalties' fall. This is the ordinary man's everyday fall that any of us can fall into. I mean, this play came out 1949. So this is after the wars and right after the Great Depression, where a lot of ordinary men were trampled upon, even though they did nothing wrong. I mean, Willy, for the most part, at least in his job, per se, like, family life, different matter, marriage, different matter, but at least in his job, like, he goes to work every day, he made connections with his clients, he made the sales, maybe not always the best sales, but he did his job, and yet he was never able to get to the top of the wheel. He was always just kind of there, just pushing the boulder forward. He never actually got to the, I forget what Greek myth that is, where the person just has to push the boulder up. Is it Sisyphus, where it's the boulder up the hill? Sisyphus then rolls back down the hill. Yeah, that's Willy. Like, that's Willy. Like, every time he takes one step forward, he's taking two steps back somewhere else. So I think it's a beautiful, like, tragedy that has so many layers to it, just like the ancient Greeks, where there's layer upon layer, whether it's in the name or the themes or certain plot elements. There's so many ways you can. I mean, that's why this play has been so popular since the 1940s, because people can keep diving in and excavating things out of it, just like a Hamlet or a Antigone or an Oedipus Rex. It's that thing of, there's very few plays that are written like this that get to be where they are, that don't give repeated gifts all the time. And I think that's what this play is, and that's why it's such a great universal tragedy, is that there's something in there for everybody to pick off of. So
And see, it's in your reference to Sisyphus that I really ground my understanding of the free will argument. And this is the last thing I'll say about it. I absolutely promise. But in that myth, like there's also the idea of the absurdist hero that we look at when it comes to French philosophy as well, which is that like imagine Sisyphus happy, rolling this stone up the hill, right? For the rest of eternity, he has found meaning in this task, right? And in this meaning, there is happiness to be found. And the tragedy of this piece is that it's the inverse. Willy has found nothing but sadness in this task, right? And it's not to say that that's acceptable in like a capitalist society, but it is a mentality that needs to be addressed when we're talking about like aspects of free will and choice in terms of our society, right? Is that absurdist hero approach to our living under uncontrollable circumstances? Because I'm going to talk about stoicism in a little bit too.
Yes. Okay. All right. We're into the back few questions. Let's see if we can plow through these a little bit faster because we're going to hit the 2-hour mark really soon. Okay. So, first off, how do we read the misogyny in this play, particularly in Willy's treatment of his wife Linda and the advice to Biff about women? Aisling, I'll let you start this one.
As the woman here.
I think it's a good place to start.
Yeah, I mean, fair treatment towards women is always going to be a casualty of late stage capitalism. So yeah, it's not cute that we're putting it on stage, but it's also not cute that it's happening in real life. It's truthful. I think it's truthful. I think that a well-nourished relationship between Willy and his wife wouldn't be a true representation of the late capitalist condition, and that's shitty, but that's how it be. Yeah, the fact that there's misogynistic, I guess, is problematic, but at the same time, I almost think it would be more problematic for Arthur Miller to put forth the idea that you can have these healthy and fulfilling relationships at the same time as being a cog in this machine, which again is depressing, but again is how it goes. So that is my take.
Perfect. I'll piggyback off you because I basically wrote the same thing of like misogyny is awful, like point blank fact. No, I guarantee nobody on this panel is like, yay, misogyny. But like it's the time period, like late 1940s is when this play is set, and we're even jumping back further in time of the 1920s, 1930s era. Like that was the time, and if you write even and that was life. So if you're gonna write that time period, be honest, and that's something that we're fighting now more than ever when we're doing these period pieces where we put on where I find people put on the 2020 goggles and go, it's awful that Willy does this. Like we can't do that anymore. It's like, well, if you're gonna write a piece of work that's set in a certain time period like this one, we have to honor that part of history. Like as much as we don't like it, as much as we don't want to think our great grandparents or whoever maybe had some of this in them, like that's life. And as much as it's not great, like if we didn't do it, like that's not being truthful and honest. And I'm sure, like if you want to do a direct in 2020, I'm sure there is a way you can, if you were really against the misogyny, there probably is a way you could direct those really misogynistic moments of the piece if you wanted to tone it back. But I don't think you should. I think you should just like own that part of what Arthur Miller put in the story, because it is part of the story. It is part of that Willy and Linda relationship. That, yes, at times he can be a loving husband to her, but then other times he can be a total dick to her. Like that just is the time. And it's one of those things of like, yeah, like it's the way it was. Doesn't mean we have to agree with it, like in our modern day, but we still need to honor what was there within this relationship and who these characters were in that time period, because that is it. Like that's the time period. And I mean, like Willy and Biff's advice thing, I mean, makes my skin crawl watching that. I was like, oh, awful advice. No, Willy, no. And I was like, probably back then that was the way men thought. Like or at least that's how men are characterized in these pieces. Whether it is Mad Men or these older neoclassical American plays that capture that time period. I mean, that's kind of it. I see, Ryan, I see you stroking your chin at me. So what are your thoughts here?
I'm having trouble with the word you've used a few times, and that's honor.
Okay, yeah, maybe not.
So I'm sure it's not how you mean it, but like I think you talk about what a director could do with this today, and what I would recommend, or if I was directing it, I wouldn't sanitize the misogyny. I would heighten it. I would have Linda be less enamored with her husband. I wouldn't change a word of the text, because the text speaks for itself, and Arthur Miller isn't public domain yet. But so his lawyers might have some ire with that. But no, I keep the text the same. But in the scene, like when he's Willie is talking to Biff, and she keeps trying to like chime in about what a great idea this is, and he tells her to stop interrupting. Like, I don't think I've ever seen a version of this where she doesn't just passively take that and then immediately defend him when Biff snaps at him. Like, the line is still there where she's going to defend, but if she does it like out of obligation, more so than out of respect, or out of fear even of what he will do if she takes Biff's side in this argument in her defense. Like, I think, like you mentioned Mad Men a moment ago, and what that show does so well is it shows the sexism of the 1960s from the women's perspective. And I think that perspective is what we are missing here. There's a reason why the essay is called Tragedy in the Common Man. And he is talking about how, anyone from any class could be a tragic hero, but doesn't mention women as a possibility at all. It's Death of a Salesman. I'm sure someone has probably done a gender bent version at some point of a Death of a Saleswoman, unless Arthur Miller's lawyers took issue with that too. But he is one of the ones who is one of the worst offenders for that. He got that from Beckett. I think it is too easy in this play, whether you're directing it, watching it, acting in it, to just get hung up on all of these characters serve Willie's journey. And I think Linda becomes the biggest casualty in that. And just kind of one last point, because like I wrote this question and I wrote it before rewatching this, like we're watching this production, and it had been like a number of years since the last time I engaged with this play. And something I'd forgotten about, or else it definitely would have been included in the phrasing of the question, is what a misogynist Happy is. Like that had kind of, I had forgotten about that until watching, like, man, he's the worst of them all. And like just the way he talks about every woman he's ever met, and like his whole, and the play doesn't seem to have an issue with that. Like he meets these two women in the bar who seem to be into it and like don't have a problem with it. And like, that's just another opportunity. If I was staging it today, I would, like, they might still leave with him, possibly out of fear even. But like, I don't think they would be, I would not stage them as being like, ooh, who's this handsome stranger who's talking down to us? Like, so yeah, just to sum it all up, I don't think we can escape the misogyny of this play, but we can handle it differently. And that's what I would like to see more productions doing moving forward.
Will, what are your thoughts?
Sorry about that. I'm back.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I 100% agree with Ryan, and I know that Ryan knows this about me, but I think any kind of like grand erasure of history, how it was, is a poor way to handle stagings. Now, that said, like I think that there needs to be a heightening of these elements in modern stagings, because what we need to see as a society, like as communities, is one, how we've grown and how we haven't grown. And to quote Hamlet, and I'm sorry to do that to everybody, but when we're talking about representations of plays and actors and action on stage and of capturing of a time, for anything still overdone is the purpose of playing, whose end both and first and now was and is to hold as twere the mirror up to nature. And to follow that says to, the showing virtue their own features, and to scorn the own image of that virtue. And to show the degradation, and at times as well the representation of the time, or of the piece, or of the action, or of the idea. And I think that that's what this play does well, and what Arthur Miller does brilliantly is he captures the good and the bad. Brilliantly, and a mentor that I know three of us have had, and I'm not sure if Ashley has met her, maybe, or at least heard of her, Paula Tamarkin, a TA and a mentor of mine, and somebody I really look up to, once said that a powerful play has the audience sitting there laughing, and then afterwards saying, oh, like, I shouldn't have laughed, or why am I laughing? Or crying and say, I shouldn't cry, because this person's horrible, right? And when we look at Willy, really, if you take a look at his actions and apply it to a modern day setting, like there's inexcusable horror and violence and toxic behavior and terrible parentage, a bad partner, unfaithful to say the least, lying. Like there's a lot of terrible, terrible qualities. And yet at the end of the play, you feel sad. I think that really says something about the writing, that you can take such a terrible person and make us feel something of pity and sadness for the character, right? And I think that that's what Miller does quite well. When we talk about the misogyny of the piece, of course, it's not appropriate for today in any form, fashion. The advice he gives, the way he lives, and the way he encourages his sons to live is an absolute tragedy in and of itself. And I think that could be a highlight of a modern staging if you want to take a look at that as the perpetuity of toxic masculinity. Just an idea. But it certainly is a stamp and a capture of that time period. And I think that that's something that is important to remember, because anytime that you're erasing mistakes of the past, you fall victim to the future having the same potential. Exactly. And I think that that's a dangerous precedent for any society, community, person to set for themselves or outward.
Mm-hmm. Well said. Well said. All right, let's head into the final question, which is, does Willy make the right choice by killing himself via the car at the end of the play? Will, I know you've alluded that you've been building up to this answer to this question, so I'll let you kick this one off.
Oh, Marcus Aurelius at us, please.
Actually, I was going to quote Seneca.
Oh, my mistake.
Marcus Aurelius. Oh, that's so cliche of you.
Wrong Stoic. Stupid.
So I first want to preface my answer by saying this is that for those people struggling with mental health and struggling with the choice of life and death, there are so many resources out there, and so many people love and care about you. And please seek out those resources. Please follow through with your commitment. You have so much to offer to the world, and you have a support system around you, whether you see it or not right now. It's so incredible to remember that. And I just wanted to state that before going into this section, because there is a specific passage that I do want to reference. And I do feel that it's likely that Arthur Miller might have actually been taking a look at this at some point during his writings and saying, like, how do I bring that to the stage? Especially when we talk about him looking at ancient societies and perhaps the ways that they staged stories or the way that they staged writings. And the thing that I want to talk about, and I believe it's Seneca, and Ryan, you can correct me because I'm sure that you know this as well, is that Seneca had a friend that was imprisoned, lost all their money, lost their partner, and basically lost everything to his name. And he was, or had the potential to, I think is the story. And what happened is that he wrote to Seneca saying, like, I am so afraid of losing everything that I've ever had and everything that I could ever become. And Seneca writes back, well, what if you do? Like, let's imagine the worst case scenario. Like, because he had been going to other friends and they're like, everything will be fine. It'll all work out in the end, right? And he's like, I didn't feel satisfied with those answers. So Seneca writes back and he says, like, what if you do lose everything? What then? It's a very Stoic principle. It's like you have control over yourself, your actions, and the way you react to things, not the world around you, the society that oppresses around you, and the things that are pushed onto you. But what you can control is the way that you react to these things and what you choose to do with that reaction. And so when it comes to this question of killing himself at the end of the play, it's difficult. I don't know if there's a right choice in life or death, and Seneca hits on this a lot and would argue that when the worst comes to pass, we must ask ourselves, what then? To some Stoics, the answer is to simply ask whether the quality of life is still worth embracing. And we see this argument happen with a lot of people that are still like on life support, right? Is like, when does quality of life begin to weigh in? And I think that the more intriguing question for me when I watched this, with the understanding of what some Roman philosophers and Greek philosophers wrote about Stoic decisions and life choices, is, was there choice for Willy by the end? And what choice is he left with? I find it so interesting, some of the lines that come out from Linda at the end of the play is like, we were so close. We just needed one more, paycheck. We just needed one more financial installment, whatever the line is. It seems like everything was maybe a lot more okay than Willy was putting pressure on himself to see, and that things could have been okay. So yeah, I think sorry, this is really challenging for me to try and phrase out, but I think for me, the question is whether his life was redeemable and could have become better if there was a choice in the way that he interacted with his sons, if he could have set his pride aside. I think that's a huge part of it too, is that we have to ask ourselves, is Willy ever going to have a staging where he tries to put the pride aside by the end of the play? We see a moment of that with Biff toward the end of the play, but he doesn't do it in totalitarian, like in a total choice. I'm rambling a little bit. I'm so very sorry. So for me, it comes down to, I don't think so. I think that he could have set his pride aside. I think he could have tried to make a stronger connection with his sons. I think he could have tried to be a better husband to his wife. I think he could have been a bit more humble. He could have taken a job. He could have done a lot of different things in order to get the money that he was looking for. But from his point of view, the quality of life had dipped to such a low that this was the only choice in his mind. And when I talk about like free will earlier, is like his choice is a choice. Like, we can talk about the predetermined quality of that, and that society has put that pressure on him to make that choice, right, and to follow that path. But I do think that it is a choice that he makes, and it's evident from the other characters' reactions that it wasn't necessary, and there were other options that he could have pursued. And I think that's a huge challenge for anybody grappling with those struggles. So yeah, I think that's all I have to say about it, is like the choice of killing himself at the end of the play. I don't think that it rarely, if ever, is the right choice. I think the phrasing of it is a hard thing to grapple with in the first place. Like his choice comes from a very selfless place, which I find is interesting too, though, like where he does want to give his family the life that he thinks they deserve, and this is his way of maintaining his image while doing that. It's a very corrupted thing, but to quote another colleague, Claire Martin, who I've been working with on a show recently from Sweet Tea Shakespeare, she's been saying that the strongest choices for any actor comes from a place of love, whether that be true love or corrupted love. And I think that that's really what's at play here, is a very corrupted form of love, which for me is where the tragedy takes place. I don't think it's the right choice, all in all. Sorry, that was a super roundabout way of answering that question.
Perfect. Okay, Aisling, what do you think?
Yeah. So, well, that was beautifully said. So I'm actually going to pivot in a different direction. I'm I'm interested in the semantics of the question, actually, in terms of, is it the right choice for him to kill himself with the car? And it's the with the car part that I'm interested in, because I want to talk about Chekhov for a second. For me, yeah, there's a lot of history too, profs that are very happy right now. It's the fact that Arthur Miller introduces the pipe so many times, like the hosing for the heat, so many times. The first time when Linda's saying, "Oh yeah, I found it. I think he's going to kill himself with it." It's like, "Oh, okay. There's the loaded gun. It's got to go off by the end of the play. LOL. I've seen Chekhov." And then it kind of comes back because the son finds it. He's like, "Hey, found it." It's like, "Okay, it's back." Rule of three. It's probably going to be back at the end, and then he will die by Willy. And then at the end, oh shoot, no, it went completely the other direction, and Arthur Miller decided, no, we're actually going to go back to when we were talking. I know she mentioned the car before, but I think that we have this red herring of the heating hose that I think is interesting.
It does still meet the rule of three, though, because Biff brings it back in their fight. I think, yeah, you're exactly right. We are led to believe that, yeah, Willy is going to snatch it from him, go into the garage and use it, and then he doesn't.
Exactly. I think that it's such an interesting red herring, because especially as we've already talked about tonight, Arthur Miller is borrowing from Ibsen. He's borrowing from the Greeks. He's borrowing from the people who came before him. But to me, this feels like such like an anti-Chekhovian thing to be like, I've introduced this thing, but I'm not going to use it because they'll see it coming, because it'll be a cliche, because why ever? Ask Arthur Miller. I just thought that was interesting. So did he make the right choice to kill himself? Within the constraints of the play, maybe. Within the constraints of grander dramaturgy in life, definitely not. But did he make the right choice to do it with a car crash? I don't know. There's just a lot to bite into there, and people have probably written papers on it that I don't want to steal from. But
I have a follow-up question for you, and before I get into kind of bringing us back into the territory that Will was broaching a minute ago, but since we're talking about the car, like when you say his choice to use the car, is that Arthur Miller's choice dramaturgically, or Willy's choice? Like, is there a moral dimension to using, from Willy's perspective, using the car as opposed to the hose?
I like that you're trying to separate Willy Loman from Arthur Miller as if it's two separate people with separate free wills. But
Well,
that
but Arthur Miller, just to kind of explain my reasoning of separating them, because Arthur Miller very cleverly did a dramaturgy thing of they were expecting the hose, but I did the car. Ain't I clever? Hee hee. But if we are thinking within the moral logic of the play, is there, aside from the fact that the author did a clever, is there something within the logic of the play to justify, since you're interrogating the choice of using the car, does that work here in the moral logic?
I think it actually does, yeah. Because, with the car, I think it was something that, because his wife couldn't drive, right? Like he doesn't make reference to Linda being able to drive. So the fact that it's something that's likely only his to use, it's only in his world, whereas the hose, as we've talked about, it's what's bringing the heat to the house, and it's something that will either corroborate or improve the quality of life for the people he's leaving behind. So I do think those are his two choices for suicide, either hose or car. Within the logic of the play, which Willy had touched on in terms of what he's leaving behind, it might make sense, but I could also be wrong. So.
If I could spin off of that. Oh, yeah. Sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I just think the car is a much more dramatic way to button that moment of it. I mean, thinking staging-wise, how, besides him just walking off stage with the hose into the basement, like if you're wanting to put the button on the character of Willy Loman, and the fact that we already set up that he tried crashing the car multiple times, that's been a repeated setup thing that we've had where it's apparently this is his way that he thinks he's going to do it, because I'm not sure if suicide is covered in the life insurance policy, but if you're going to crash the car, then you can maybe call it an accident.
Well, he's also a traveling salesman, right? It was the vehicle with which he was completing his work or lack thereof, so that also kind of factors into that.
Well,
for me too, if I was directing this piece and I was working with a character portraying Willy Loman, I think the most important thing is that up until Biff throws the rubber pipe at him, the intention is to kill himself with the rubber pipe. But again, the big question that comes up afterwards, where it's the echoing of Ben's voice is he's going to hate you. He's going to your image is going to be destroyed, is essentially the whole dynamic of how to do it, what to do. I think that the car becomes the final option as opposed to the always option of what it was going to be from the start. I mean, obviously Arthur Miller was it's going to be the car. Everyone's going to think it's the pipe, but it's going to be the car. But I think for Willy Loman, it's pipe up until the last two scenes. That's car. And so I think that's a really important dramatic note to be playing, because there's such emphasis put on the fact that Linda can't talk to him about it. Can't talk to Willy about the rubber pipe in the basement or the rubber hose, sorry. I keep saying rubber hose in the basement, because if she does, that's going to just destroy him in terms of his confidence, his self-esteem, his own sense of image, right? And the big question at the end of the play for Willy is, how do I maintain my self-image and what I've worked my entire life to create while still getting that life insurance, right? And so if he uses the rubber hose, then Biff, his wife Linda, and his other son Happy are all going to know what happened, right? But for him, a car crash is it happens, and I really think that's an important note to be playing.
It was an accident. There's plausible deniability in that.
Yeah, exactly, and I think that's a huge factor when we talk about Willy's choice of the car over the hose, because again, using the hose shatters his image, using the car perhaps maintains it. And I think we talked about pride, right? Pride is such a huge factor for this character that just keeps him from being able to change.
Yeah. Ryan, you didn't really give your full answer to this question.
So
before I give mine, I'll let you give yours.
Well, are we still talking about the car, or is this just for the actual decision?
This is for the actual question.
Okay. One last point on the car. It symbolizes an escape, but yet, as Ashley, you pointed out, that it is the vehicle of his, grind. He's driving away, escaping his life in the thing that was killing him. So, I think that is, there is more symbolism here than to certainly unpack. But in terms of the morality of this decision that he makes, I completely agree with you, Will, that, suicide is never the only option, and it's never the correct option. And when I see, whether it's on the page or in a production like this, when I see the Requiem scene and what this has done to Linda, no amount of moral calculus of I will get Biff this money and I will get my family this money and they will that is worth more to them than having me in their lives. Watching her on the ground in that cemetery reveals that that is categorically untrue, that his presence is more valuable than whatever money his insurance policy will bring in. But another thing I think about, and I was thinking about bringing this up when we were talking about the just tragedy question in general, but I think it's more appropriate here, is this play is very similar to an earlier Arthur Miller play, All My Sons. But just structure-wise, there's a lot of similarities between them. But I think what strikes me is like the huge difference, and it's kind of shocks me that this play came after, because All My Sons raises the stakes on the kind of situation we're seeing unfolded here. Joe Keller isn't just tragic because he's having trouble meeting his goals, striving for what he wants to achieve, supporting his family. His actions were directly responsible for killing 21 American pilots who were counting on his engine blocks to keep them in the air during the war. And so when I look at Willy Loman and the decisions he's made, the weight he's putting on himself, obviously there is a mental health dimension to this. But the only people you've upset are your family and yourself and your bruised sense of pride. But nobody's dead because of you, man. Get a grip. But what I think is kind of the genius of this play, and it does make sense that this came after All My Sons, is that Miller found a way to take a very small situation and blow it up into tragic proportions. All My Sons doesn't need to do that because it is already tragic. 21 young men are dead because of what you did, protagonist. And then I think stepping forward in Miller's career, something like The Crucible, which that feels like it has that scale, because this is, is quite literally the crucible that America is going through in this century, and repeating again with McCarthyism through these idea of witch hunts. But the actual tragedy of that play is, will John Proctor tarnish his name by admitting what he's done on a public record? And Miller seems hyper obsessed with the weight of our guilt on ourselves, and the way the characters have to die to escape that, and kind of the consequences to the world be damned, almost. Like, if we're talking about reasons, whether it is right or wrong for someone to ever kill themselves, I think someone like Joe Keller, I could maybe get behind. You've done something terrible and the law is not holding you accountable for it. If you kill yourself at the end of the play, I get it. But Willy Loman, I think, again, just bringing it back to how he destroys his family in this action, that his life isn't worth that insurance policy. I can't get on board with that. And maybe that's why it's tragic, is because it shouldn't have ended that way.
It's the classic story of tragic flaw with the protagonist, right? The tragic flaw is ego and pride. Yeah. Mac, if it's okay with you too, I would really love it if maybe we could put some links down into some mental health and support.
Please check the video description.
Systems.
We will definitely be putting some support links in this conversation.
I think it's really hard to look at a lot of Arthur Miller's plays without recognizing the consistent theme of mental health and the devastated lives of people who live with mental health on a day-to-day basis. But there's always a path forward. There's always choices to try and improve that quality of life. So please seek out those resources listed below.
Yes. I mean, I'll tag in for the last part of this. I mean, I'm going to paraphrase this quote. I forget who said it, but somebody said, "The act of suicide is a short-term solution. Like yes, it fixes like your emotions in that moment when you complete suicide, but it doesn't solve the bigger problems, because as we see, Linda is distraught by these actions. So let's just say that first of all, like, suicide, please seek help. There's lots of resources for you. But that being said, in the case of Willy, I hemmed and hawed on this when I was trying to find an answer to this question. And I go, and so I went, I think for Willy, for him, this is his right choice. This is in his mind, this is his last bit of control that he has, because he's lost his job, he's lost his sons, in his mind, he's lost his money, like he's lost everything else in the world. The last thing he can do is give them this life insurance policy. That is his last thing. And on top of this, as Will said, this character's flaw is that he is full of ego and pride, which means when that's damaged and he's lost this thing that made him who he was, which was being a salesman, he's lost his rudder. He's lost that drive to go out on the road every day. It's something where I'm sure, Will, you will roll your eyes at me for this one, but it's kind of like the character of Javert in Les Miserables, where throughout the whole play he is driving to catch Jean Valjean. The law is his rudder, and yet when Valjean gives him his life back, when he could easily kill him, everything he's known is twisted and gone. And there's that great lyric that Javert has on the bridge, which is, the world I have known is lost in shadow. And when he gets fired by Howard, the
Javert.
world... Yeah. Javert's line on the bridge when
Javert gets fired by Howard. Sorry, I was making a joke.
No. Oh.
Did you watch the play, Ryan?
Yeah, I'm sure that line is in there.
You must have missed that number.
Clearly.
Yes. But the lyric is, the world I have known is lost in shadow. And for Willy, I go, that's probably like for him, like the minute after he leaves Howard's office and he's being kicked out and he's rudderless, like he kind of is now wandering aimlessly. He doesn't know. He doesn't know what to do with every day of his life. For 36 years, I think he says, he's been a traveling salesman, and now he's in mental decline. He doesn't have the money to pay off that last bit of the insurance. The debts are piling up, as Linda says. Like, we need this money. We need this payment. Like before he heads in to see Howard. So the world is just slowly but surely. It's that darkness. It's that shadow is creeping in. So I go, as much as it's awful, and I'm sure Arthur Miller. I'm sure there was another option for Willy, like Charlie giving him that job. Once again, it's that pride. It's Willy's pride that prevents him from taking those other options that we all can see and go, no, Charlie's giving you the way out. Take the lifeline. And he's going, no, like, I'm lost. I can't move forward anymore. This is like, I have to do the one last thing I can do, which is, unfortunately, to complete suicide, to give my family the money that they will need to go forward. As much as it's awful, as much as Willy shouldn't do it, because I'm sure there are other options. To him in that moment, this was his best option that he saw. And once again, it's that thing of, it's a difficult thing, but I think for Willy, in that moment with the car, it was his choice that he made. So, yeah. Oh.
I'd love to point out one final thing, if possible, that just kind of occurred to me in this conversation. I mean, what an interesting echo it winds up being of The Great Gatsby as well, right? Because you have these two seminal American texts that are talking about how terrible capitalism is and how it's not going to end up well for anyone. And they're both ending in these, symbolic, traumatic car crashes. And it hadn't occurred to me before. It's just in this conversation, it's like, oh, that's super tropey and interesting. And I wonder if there's a paper there to be written. But I think it's interesting how the only way out for these iconic American characters winds up being through the car. Henry Ford, the symbol of American capitalism, is the only way out. And I think that's kind of interesting.
Interesting indeed. And that's it. We've made it to the end of the review. Voila, everybody. Well done. So before we go, though, we'll give everybody a chance to plug their socials. So Aisling, we'll start with you. Where can people find you if they want to get in contact with you? If you want them to contact you.
Sure, you can contact me. I have a website. It's aislingmurphy.ca. And I have an Instagram, which is ALY_Murph on Instagram. That's me.
Perfect. Wonderful. Will, you are on
you
Instagram, but we can follow you now, right?
Yeah, no, I have an Instagram. I'm doing the Instas. The Instagram name is Will R Bartley. Very easy to find. I have a picture of a sailboat, me on a sailboat. Very easy to find. And then Facebook is just Will Bartley, and you could always email me at will.bartley12@gmail.com, or you can reach me at the Cup of Hemlock Theatre emails, which are listed all over our social media stuff, so you can find that in some of our company about page stuff on our Facebook page. But if you message me on Instagram, know that I just may not respond because I am not a very active social media user.
Ryan, give us your classic sign-off, good sir.
Well, I am even less of an active social media user because I'm not even on Instagram. No, okay, you can. Yeah, if you're a fan of me, you can just follow Cup of Hemlock because pretty much everything I share is just these videos when they go live. So on the one social media platform that I'm even on, which is the one where you have to approve friend requests from, and I don't want to do that from strangers. So just send that love to Cup of Hemlock instead.
Perfect. And you can find me at all social media platforms at Mackenzie Horner. You also can follow my podcast, Before the Downbeat, which is where each week we break down a musical. As of this recording, we have just revealed that our season 2 finale episode will be none other than the Jonathan Larson musical Rent. So I know. Yeah, not my favorite musical, and you'll find out why if you listen next Friday. But stay tuned for that, and please stay tuned for more of these great reviews. We've now subscribed to the new Stratfest at Home platform, so we'll be able to be watching more Stratford reviews, as well as be sure to subscribe to Probably HD, because that is also
hashtag not sponsored.
Not yet. I keep tagging them. So we will be sure to keep pulling from this wonderful catalog as well. But until next time, everybody, thank you so much for watching. I will say our next episode will actually be our first musical we will be reviewing, so stay tuned for that. Will shakes his head. All right, everybody. We'll see you later. Bye!